This Michael Rubin is a former Pentagon official, senior fellow with the American Enterprise Institute. Thank you very much, Mr. Rubin, for speaking with us. I want to first touch upon what happened in Alaska. What is your best sense of what transpired in that meeting between Trump and Putin? President Trump, going into the meeting, seemed to be talking up the prospects of a ceasefire a lot. He came out of that meeting much closer to the Russian position, which is instead of a ceasefire, let's talk about a permanent peace agreement. And he'll be discussing that later tonight with President Zelensky and various leaders of Europe. What do you think went down in Alaska?
Well, you know, many people in Washington are comparing this to the Yalta summit at the end of World War II, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin decided to break up Europe and determine the fate of Europe without actually having the Europeans have much say in this. What Donald Trump is doing is making an agreement with Vladimir Putin with regard to the fate of not only Ukraine, but perhaps much of the rest of Eastern Europe, without actually giving the Eastern Europeans or the Ukrainians much say. That's why there's such a panicked rush to Washington right now, both among Zelensky and European leaders.
So what do you think the contours of this agreement necessarily are? I mean, Trump was talking about land swaps and Ukraine will have to give up control of some of its territory. I think he posted on social media last night that, you know, if you can forget about Crimea, you can forget about membership to NATO. What are the broad contours of such a deal, if at all one comes to pass?
But, you know, saying land swaps actually puts a little bit too generous a patina on this agreement. What Donald Trump is talking about is forcing Ukraine to give up land. There's no swap involved. Ukraine is not getting any other land for its trouble. So basically what we're doing is rewarding Russia for its aggression. Now, what many in Europe worry about is if Russia is able to get away with this sort of aggression in Ukraine, what's going to happen in Moldova, where Russia already occupies a quasi-state there? What's Transnistria? What's going to happen in northern Kazakhstan? And the nightmare scenario for many in Europe, and also for that matter in the United States, is what happens to the Baltic states. And the reason why that's a nightmare scenario here in Washington is that, of course, the Baltic states are, of course, NATO members. And so this could actually entail NATO becoming involved in a conflict with Russia.
What leverage, though, does Ukraine, or even for that matter, all of these European leaders who are coming to the White House tonight, what leverage do they have? I mean, if Trump says, look, this is the deal, this is what Putin is agreeing to, and I want you to, take this deal, how can they push back?
You know, Russia is not necessarily, doesn't necessarily have a position of strength here. They've lost more men. Basically, they've decimated an entire generation of Russians. They've lost more men than in any conflict since World War II. Far more, many times more than in Afghanistan. And if Ukraine continued to have access to arms to defend its territory, then, of course, Ukraine wouldn't be in a position where they would be forced to give up arms. Now, many people could say, look, if the United States, if Europe are providing Ukraine with arms, then in a way, the United States and Europe are involved in aggression. But remember, the 1991 Almaty Agreement, which which came upon the downfall of the Soviet Union, had Russia and all the former Soviet states agree to the borders that existed during the Soviet Union. Russia was a signatory to that. And then in 1994, you had the Budapest Memorandum, in which Ukraine gave up its legacy nuclear weapons in exchange for Russian, American, and British guarantees of sovereignty over its territory. Well, where's that guarantee right now if we're forcing Ukraine to give up its sovereign land? I mean, basically what we're doing is giving the message that all states should have nuclear weapons because they can't trust Moscow, Washington, or London.
What about how India sees this? I mean, clearly, India sort of has now direct skin in this game because of the secondary oil tariffs that was imposed by President Trump a couple of weeks ago. And he has said, I think either before going into Alaska or coming after it, that as of now he doesn't intend to increase the secondary tariffs. And that's directly linked to what many White House officials have been saying, Indian purchase of Russian oil. So the sooner this war ends, India sort of gets off the hook. Would that be a fair reading?
That would be a fair reading, but India should be furious right now. First of all, much of the gas which is being pumped through Azerbaijan is actually Russian. So when Europe is saying, hey, we're disconnecting ourselves from Russian gas, the fact of the matter is they're just, in a way, cheating. And everyone knows it, because when you actually look at what Azerbaijan can produce versus what is occurring, what is flowing through the Azeri and Turkish pipelines, Azerbaijan can't produce all the oil which is flowing through its pipelines. It actually has deals with Lukoil. It has swap deals with Iran. The fact of the matter is, Western Europe is purchasing Russian energy. The United States is also purchasing things from Russia, including uranium hexafluoride and other key minerals. We just call that exceptions. The fact of the matter is, Donald Trump is basically eating out of Vladimir Putin's hand like a little lapdog. And the fact that India is being penalized for doing business which is crucial to its industry, to its national interest, where the United States is doing much the same thing, is utmost hypocrisy. That's not something which New Delhi should ever forgive.
And the concern in Delhi is not just, these oil tariffs or the immediacy of this war and India getting punished, singled out for purchasing Russian oil when, like you said, China does the same, Turkey does the same, etc. Is also the worry that the entire strategic relationship, the strategic partnership of the last 25 years, which has been cultivated by at least 4 different administrations in the US and 2 different political dispensation governments here in India, Trump is willing to throw that under the bus.
Well, Trump is willing to throw that under the bus, and I've said it before, and I'll put my neck out here. Trump, I believe, has been bribed by, in any way, sense, or name, even if legally that is not the case. I believe that Pakistan has given him incentives, has given him business, or his family members business interests, or else Turkey or Qatar have paid Trump Incorporated in order to take some of the positions they're taking, because there's no other logical reason. It's Occam's razor here that the simplest explanation is probably the truth. That said, what India needs to do, given that Trump is the exception rather than the rule, is say to Congress, which remains incredibly pro-India, say to the Democrats, say to any future Republican administration, including, look, it's no secret that Secretary of State Marco Rubio has a desire to run for president. He's probably going to resign in about a year to do so. Say, what guarantees do we have that this isn't going to happen again? How are you going to actually compensate us for our losses under Trump, given that you, the United States, abrogated both the letter and the spirit of our agreements? That's the conversation which India has to have right now, so that we never have to live through an episode like what Donald Trump has done to the U.S.-Indian relations. There's absolutely no excuse for it.
Close out by going back to the point that you made. So you are convinced that either legally or illegally, Trump or Trump Incorporated, Trump family businesses have been given huge amounts of money by Pakistan, and that's why Trump is, throwing this relationship at the altar of getting into bed with the Pakistanis?
I can't be more clear. The answer to that is yes. The Trump administration is notorious for blurring the lines between business and policy, for engaging in conflicts of interest. The only quibble I would have with you is I'm not sure whether it's Pakistan directly which is doing this, or perhaps India, or perhaps Turkey or Qatar in the background, because we also see a consistency within the Trump administration in which they appear to be embracing more radical Islamist causes, in which they appear to be willing to be bribed by the Muslim Brotherhoods. We saw the $400 million gift of an airplane from Qatar. We've seen even Laura Loomer, who is one of the Trump administration loyalists, go after Tom Barrack, the American ambassador to Turkey and a close friend of Donald Trump, for empowering Islamists. We see the United States lifting sanctions on an al-Qaeda leader in Syria And let's face it, Syria has become a jihadi state. There's no putting lipstick on that pig. So the answer to your question is yes. I believe that Donald Trump has been bribed to take the positions he's taking.
All right, Michael Rubin, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us and putting your thoughts into perspective for our viewers. Thank you very much for your time.